I cannot stress enough the potential to have as bad or worse of a southern rust a year as we did last year. And, last year, if a farmer did not protect that acre with a fungicide application, I heard as many as 80 bushel to the acre yield loss.
Welcome back to the Cornelius Seed Podcast. We're starting off July with a crop update. And we're going to go into what could happen, what is happening, and really what everyone's worried about, but maybe shouldn't be yet. So that's southern rust, nitrogen loss, and tar spot. So, Craig, how are you? You're probably a little sticky. I've been out seeing fields, and it's been, day 3 of almost 100-degree weather.
Yeah, we had some dealer training up at Brian Witt's there in Mark Todd's territory yesterday around Lanark. It was a little warm, but we had a nice breeze, so that kind of alleviated that a little bit.
It's been a really unique year, the start of the season. We've come from cold and wet starting off to not enough rain to too much rain to now we're getting this heat blast. What are you seeing as you're out there? What are guys calling you about?
In general, the crop condition across our footprint, Illinois, Iowa, and the southern Wisconsin, and a little bit of Minnesota, we're off to a pretty good start. There's always pockets that have had tougher conditions at planting time or right afterwards. But what I see is the corn crop is really in pretty good shape. I mean, we'll visit with some people. Normally we kind of go look at problem issues, and everything seems to be pretty good right now. So I think we have a long ways to go before the crop is in the bin. But corn in particularly is off to a good start because we have pretty good stands. Most areas we have a good stand count. It came out of the ground well, and it looks to be pretty healthy. And that's always got to be our foundation to have top end yields, and it looks like that's there. Once again, we have storms and dry weather and drain fill and all that, and disease to look out for down the road. Soybeans are quite a little bit behind where we would like to see them. The spring planting season there, we didn't get off to a super early start, and then we had a lot of stop and goes due to rain and so forth. So I think there's large acres that did not hit the early planting window that will get us into the early flowering on soybeans. So there, plenty that did, but there was a lot that did not. And that hitting that early flowering window, could tack on another 8 to 10 bushel on the soybean yield. So I think probably our top end of a soybean yield across our footprint, which is the heart of the corn belt. I think that's probably already gone on soybeans. They can do a lot to add yield as we go on, but they're not going to have that extra 8 to 10 bushel that we get from early planting. I'm getting some calls on ground out areas. We do have some of those. We've had some pretty big rains over the last couple of weeks, some pretty good storms. I've looked at some green snap, but pretty limited on that. But for the most part, the calls are pretty positive that I've been receiving on a pretty decent situation here with the crop. But here we go now. We're 90-degree temperatures, so we're getting ready to head into July. Easily July is normally our most stressful month. So, are we going to keep getting moisture to alleviate some of that heat? Or are we going to keep getting heat, or what's going to happen is the question.
So to kick it into what we should be talking about, which is disease. And one of the things that as I think back just of the 2 weeks, we've had 3 days of really hot, sticky weather. And if you would ask me what it's been like, I would have thought it's been like this all summer long. But the fact of the matter is it hasn't. And leading up into that heat, we had just an absolutely gorgeous week. And leading up to that, it was raining. It wouldn't stop. And when you've got that, and you've told us about the disease triangle, seems to set us up for things. And you start to see folks wonder, is the rust going to be heavy again? And what's that looking like? Obviously, moisture there can probably be more impactful to nitrogen, what will lead to there, but kind of set that up for us. Southern rust picture, we were just absolutely, a lot of folks were decimated by that last year. You usually don't get events like that 2 years back to back. Are we far enough along the year now to get a feeling on that? So what's your gut telling you? And I guess what have your eyeballs been telling you?
Yeah, and I guess we probably should have started out this conversation with giving our southern rust warning, so people would listen a little further, because that is the big issue, I think, right now. Is I cannot stress enough the potential to have as bad or worse of a southern rust year as we did last year. And last year, if a farmer did not protect that acre with a fungicide application, it was I heard as many as 80 bushel to the acre yield loss. And, I've experienced a 60, 70 myself, 2021, when we had it really bad. So the thing of it is, southern rust, because it overwinters down south, it's got to come up in Gulf, storms that originate out of the Gulf, or that Gulf moisture. So a lot of times we think, well, we had a bad year this year, it won't be bad for another few years. It's a very sporadic disease, but it looks like it's setting up to be a couple of years in a row. And the reason for that is because we have had a ton of Gulf originated storms already this spring. I mean, starting in early May, late April, early May, and it's just been ever since then. Storm after storm has come up through there, and big, huge storms that have moved way north and west as it's come up as well. You get that rotation, and there's a company. There's a magazine article I was reading. I don't remember exactly which one, but there's a company called Spornado, and they actually have spore traps that they'll set out. There's a fee, of course, involved in that. You can do it in your corn soybean fields. It's probably not real cost prohibitive, but they do, particularly things like vineyard and places like that, where they need to really watch what kind of diseases are moving in high value type areas. And they have found then they'll take these traps and they'll identify what spores that they're finding in there. And they found southern rust a while ago now, already in places where they'd really never seen it before. So it's up here already. The spores are up here, and we have the host, which is corn. And then all we need to do is have the conditions. And southern rust and gray leaf spot, those are the two diseases that really like warm, humid, moist weather. So I've heard a lot of talk recently, and I hear this every year, because it's the new kid on the block. Oh, we found tar spot already. There's tar spot in central Iowa. There's tar spot here. I don't really care if there's tar spot right now. I don't look for it right now, because tar spot likes cool and extended wet conditions. Okay. So diseases like that, and northern corn leaf blight is another, common rust is another. We see them often in the first half of June, because that's the kind of weather that we have in the first half of June. But when we get into what we're having today, this is gray leaf spot and southern rust weather. And July is almost always that way. So when that happens, then your diseases like tar spot and northern corn leaf blight and common rust, they just get put in check. They won't cycle, and produce more spores. They're still there, and they'll sit there dormant. And then when August gets here and we start having those long periods of wetness, through heavy dews and things like that, and we get more moderate temperatures, then those diseases will pick back up and be a problem. So they don't threaten us right now like southern rust and gray leaf spot do. These guys love that hot, humid weather that we hate. That's their favorite time frame. Southern rust, in particular, can be a bigger problem than even gray leaf spot. We don't see as much gray leaf spot as we used to do anymore, for whatever reason, and it seems to it happened as tar spot has kind of picked up. The gray leaf spot seems to be less, but southern rust can go through a complete infection cycle in as little as 7 days. Most of the other ones it's more like a couple of weeks. And they don't have to have a very long period of leaf wetness. So about 6 hours of dew, and southern rust it's cycling again. Okay. And you take like a northern or a tar, they got to have a lot longer periods. So, little dew overnight, dries off real early the next day, and they're not going to be able to cycle. But southern rust is a different animal that way. So you can see why last year when we kept having rains all July long, and we had that hot weather, we just had cycle after cycle after cycle of southern rust. So we don't know what it's going to be like yet this year, but we know the spores are already up here. They're probably very far north compared to normal, and they're here plenty early. It's likely to be a bad year, and it's time to have a plan, because where we protected for the southern rust last year, we were able to keep the yield. So
You've always been the one that's, I would say, is always positive and optimistic. You say, let's wait and see. And in the decade that I feel like I've known you, usually have not come out and beat the drum this way out of the gate. This early on, I would almost say. It goes to show something about we learned our lesson last year. And sadly, for better or for worse, because like you said, some people really took it on the chin. And it's, and I don't want, we're not making light of that either, because it definitely was not a year. Any year isn't, but especially last year with the farm economy, to go throw more input at things and get a fungicide application or even two of them. And so some folks really felt it, but we saw it worked. We saw plot data, everything I aggregated, and I combined the university and the third parties and our internals, and it was high 30s to low 40s average. So like you said, some spots were a lot bigger where fungicide wasn't used. So what you're hearing here is make those plans, coordinate it. Everyone's got their flavor of how they prefer to apply it. Drone works for some, for others, their setup might not work best for that. And just one of those things of, if you haven't had those conversations, lock them in. And so takes me to, with the type of setup that we're having, and if you are recommending to consider the fungicide application, what would that application time would you recommend?
yeah, and I'll remind you, we talked about the southern rust being up here early last year, about this time of the year. We didn't realize how bad it was going to be, but that's why we're really beating the drum now, because getting those calls from customers that had that 80 bushel yield hit, in the fall is just that's not fun.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to see that happen. And so, we talked the other day that we want to make sure that we get the word out here even more than we did last year, because hopefully nobody will go unprotected, from the southern rust this year. And you don't have to spray before you see it. That I'm going to talk about, what our recommendations are. But if you're not going to do that, you're going to have to be a multiple scouting trip out there and make sure that you don't have an issue. But my recommendation for last several years, before we had the big outbreak last year, has been a long-residual fungicide at the R1 stage, which is silking, tasseling silking, full tassel soaks are out there. That has been proven yield-wise to be the best. If you're going to just do one application, that's the best timing. You can find studies that show another timing's better, but when you put them all together, the large percentage of the time, that's your best time frame to put it on. Now, long residual, because that does bring us back to the tar spot. When I just see tar spot out there, we see a ton of it in the fall when we're going through our genetic trials, and then we have yield data and everything on there. I don't see it by itself as a very injurious disease. Now, it can be if it's heavy enough, but I see it pretty heavy, not affecting yield very much. But if you combine it with any other disease, and I don't know what the mechanism is, but it seems to be, if you have another stress on that plant, whether it's from gray leaf spot or northern or southern's the worst, because by itself, southern, I think, is the worst yield robbing disease that we fight. But you combine any of those together with the tar, and the tar seems to really be more active and take more out of the plant, if it's already stressed from something else. So that's the reason that I say a long residual fungicide, because if we're applying July 10th, July 15th, and we've got a 30-day residual, so if I can have that plant clean, and then the tar spot sets in the middle of August, which is when we generally start seeing it ramp up, then I'm not really worried about what the tar is going to do if I've kept that plant clean of everything else. So that's what's been my position with that recommendation. And, we've got probably 10 SDHI mainly fungicides that are long lasting that we didn't used to have. They're more expensive, as they should be because they're giving us more value. And then you've got products like Veltima, which is actually a long lasting triazole that are at least as good. I think Veltima is probably the longest lasting. I've used it for several years now, and it's done a great job for me. But so that's the recommendation, long lasting at R1. Now, under this economy, if you say I don't want to put that out there if I don't need it. I mean, obviously you can scout, but you're going to need to be scouting probably every week, every other week. You could also go a generic, good old standby, a generic quilt, or one of those other products that we used to use, and you can get them pretty cheap. They're going to be a couple of weeks of residual, so you could put that on at R1 and then make sure maybe 3 weeks later you're out there scouting real heavily, because if the southern rust continues to cycle, you're going to need to do a second application. And we saw 2 applications last year, probably was the best yield program. So we saw a yield bump, I know, in the studies that I looked at, with 2 applications instead of 1 of the long lasting, but probably not enough to pay the difference in putting that second application on. So peace of mind for me to have that 1 application and get myself 30 days of residual. And that certainly protected the yield last year. I had a field at my mom's that I watched had every disease known to man at the time that we sprayed it at R1. And we had really heavy southern rust and tar at the end of the year in this area. And so we had an R1 application of Veltima, and that was 246 over the scale dry. So that tells me, that proves, the program that we were able to protect yield with 1 application of a long-lasting fungicide in the face of a heavy southern rust year.
Okay. Well, that's helpful and it's good to know. A couple things there is we can talk freely about whether it's generic or your personal favorite or whatever. We're not saying you sponsored by this group and or this chemical company also provides our seed. No, it's just, here's what you've seen, here's what life shows you, and you're definitely always recommending what works best for your situation and your operation. The point of it being is, we learned our lesson last year, and we want to protect those acres. And leads me to my next one. I would say we do a good job of not trying to be salesy. Our goal is just to go through and share helpful agronomic info to anybody that's out there farming, whether you're a customer of Cornelius or not. But something I noticed last year as we were preparing our product guides, and we've updated our website to find product faster, which is excellent, is that not many outfits have a southern rust rating or a fungicide response rating. And so I call attention to that, is that whether you planted Cornelius or not, or you're out scouting, have a scouting plan too, right? Folks know what hybrids in the field, know which one is more susceptible to it if it's got a rating. I'll help that out with your plan, because there's a lot of acres to go out there and cover. But without beating the drum too much on southern rust, get out there, scout. It's probably gonna be bad again. And it's interesting because just yesterday I was asking someone that I trust a lot. Right before I always talk to you, I kind of like to get my finger on the pulse on what are other people getting asked, or what are they seeing. And I asked this person about southern rust and what their provider was telling them. And he said, "Oh, we don't have to worry about it. We already got hit with that last year." And I thought, "Oh, cool. You should stay tuned for a podcast, because I think you should."
Yeah.
And I'm just afraid of dismissive advice like that. And so,
Yeah.
if you're doing that, guy, please stop it. Put people's livelihood on the line. So I guess why I wanted to say that rant is that lines up with what you're saying. It can be big potential, is that there's some events that went through early in the year that are setting us up for this. Now into the wet events we went through. I drove back this last weekend from northeast Missouri. I was just kind of window farming, looking at what I see. As you said, lots of beautiful crop from the highway, but also was interested to see a lot of very freshly replanted stuff that it was obvious got drowned out. So it's really wet. And I saw some fields with some spotty yellowing corn, and it's obvious there's some issues out there from saturated soils. Is that the only reason? Why all the yellow corn suddenly?
It's been from excess moisture, and then of course you'll see it in the low-lying areas and the pothole areas. You get out into north central Iowa there, where they kind of the pothole, just the way it was formed out there. You have a lot of that probably on an annual basis, but more than we've had for a while, I think, here in the heart of the Corn Belt. Just the timing of some of these rains, and I've seen corn that's 6 feet tall, and there's patches out there now that's just dead. I mean, it was saturated long enough, no oxygen available to the plants and to the microbes, and it just completely destroyed it. But the yellowing, the first thing that we worry about is nitrogen, because when nitrogen gets in the nitrate form, nobody likes the nitrate form because nitrates will leach down, and of course water causes that. But also, when we have saturated soils, some of the microbes will rob an oxygen molecule off the nitrate, which is NO3, and then when that happens, it turns into a gas, and we lose it up through the atmosphere. That's called denitrification. So you're probably seeing a lot of that, in these wet holes that we're seeing. So this is a case where if they're extensive, you would consider doing a rescue nitrogen treatment. You can take soil samples and get a soil nitrate level to see how much you need to put on, but it's pretty good possibility that if you can get some nitrogen on there, it will pay in the fall in those areas. And so we're talking rescue treatments here. So as tall as corn is, we'd have to go in with with like a Hagee type sprayer and put the nitrogen on with Y drops right next to the row, put on some 32 or something like that, or a high clearance ground rig that can put dry urea on, or the ultimate rescue is an airplane, putting dry urea on there. And, 50 pounds probably will take you a long ways. I know, talked to a customer yesterday is going to get 32 pounds worth of Coron on, as a foliar spray. And, it's a good thing to do. Soybeans the nodules, likely you dig up soybeans after they've been saturated like that, and you split the nodule open, and instead of being a nice salmon color, which shows it's healthy, it'll just be black, and it's pretty much dead. But, they should start nodulating again once that soil dries up. And that rhizobia bacteria, gets its reaction with the root going again, and they should eventually come out of that. But it's pretty ugly. Now, flip side of that is we've got a lot of moisture in the ground to take our crop a long ways. A lot of times when we have drowned out areas, we end up having pretty good yields.
So see, that's that optimism I'm always talking about. So, I real quick though, because you kind of gave me another cool agronomy 101 there, denitrification versus leaching. Can you kind of quickly recap the difference between the two again, or do they lead to the same thing at the end of the day, no matter what?
Well, they lead to the same thing, but the nitrogen all breaks down into any form of nitrogen is going to eventually break down into nitrate, And the initial, when we make our own nitrogen, commercial nitrogen, anhydrous ammonia is that's the first one that we make. And then, from there we break it on down into urea and ammonium nitrate. 32% is urea ammonium nitrate, means it's 50% urea, 25% ammonium, and 25% nitrate. So the ammonium portion and the urea portion have to break down on into nitrate over time through processes in the soil with soil microbes and things like that. But it all breaks down eventually into nitrate. And, the nitrate is not going to adhere to the soil, to the organic matter and the soil colloids and things like that because of its charge. And so it will eventually move on down in the soil as water moves it on down. So we will eventually get out of the root zone. It can get in, field tiles and on into the water and things like that. It's things that we worry about. Now, really heavy organic matter soils, that process is really pretty slow, so we're generally like around here, west of Monmouth, we can hold that nitrate, as long as we need it to be in that soil profile. But then the flip side of that, since nitrogen is NO3, that's the molecules that make up nitrogen. If it's in saturated soils, there are soil microbes in there that will steal oxygen off of that NO3 just to survive in that saturated soil, and then that turns it into a gas, NO2, which is going to be a gas form, and that's going to just move up through the soil profile and just go ahead and get into the atmosphere. So that's denitrification.
Okay.
So those are the two processes. We can lose nitrate going down and we can lose it going up. So that's why we don't like nitrate. We try to prevent the other forms from turning into nitrate as quickly as we can. But the plant can only take up nitrate and ammonium, those two forms. So it has to break down into ammonium for the plant to use it, and then it will break down into nitrate. The plant will also use that. When the plant takes in nitrate, it has to convert it back to the ammonium form to make it usable. So we call that ammonium feeding. We would prefer to have the ammonium be our source that gets into the plant. So it's nitrogen cycle is very interesting.
No, and we're not even getting into it now, but then you add the element of the biological approach to nitrogen. But you've hit the rescue nitrogen options. I'm just kind of curious on, so someone's out there trying to determine whether they need an additional N. How does someone determine whether additional N is justified, and how late is too late?
Well, we can probably gain, with a rescue nitrogen right up to the tasseling time frame, somewhere in there, maybe a little bit after, but certainly any time before, we can still probably gain some yield with that kind of an application. We all, through studies and experience and everything, we all try to put on the rate that we know we need, maybe a touch more in case we lose some of it, things like that we've just talked about. But if you think, if you've had saturated, and I've had saturated soils before, and you just take a soil sample, just like you're doing if you're testing for, P and K and pH and everything, and you send it into your soil lab, and they'll just do a soil nitrate test. They'll test how many nitrates are in the soil, and then based on the time of the year, they'll have a scale that tells you how much deficient you are and recommendation for how much to add at that, if you're at shoulder high corn like we are now, roughly B12 stage, they'll give you an indication on how much you need to add to have sufficient nitrogen.
Oh boy, I tell you what, couldn't have been more timely for us to talk about this, just because earlier a call was coming in from one of our DSMs in north central Iowa, Mike Prevey, and I hit the deny button because you and I are chatting, told him what we're talking about, and said, hey, what is there anything he's seeing out there as it relates to this? Also, some of my SAP tests are showing that we've got more than enough N, but our conversion percentage is poor due to micronutrient imbalances. So testing to see if you need more N, or rather a good micronutrient product like a foliar trace, could help the conversion rate in corn. So I think it was kind of a supplemental info there he was giving, but the way I'm interpreting that is, and you just hit it when I asked, how does someone determine that? Anything to add to that or anything to correct on that?
No, I think probably what they're talking about there is, there's a correlation with all the nutrients that, we need to produce a good crop in the soil. And if we're deficient on one, that can affect the availability of others. Just going back to pretty pretty basic that we've worried about for years is the ratio of P to K in the soil. And as we years ago when we were putting hog manure on it was really high in P, and we've corrected that now for the most part. We feed low phytate feed, and our samples coming out of the hog manure are pretty good, pretty even now. But if you get your P and K ratio too close together, they'll kind of tie each other up. And so, we like to have at least a 4-to-1, K to P being lower than the K. And 7-to-1 is, I would consider to be ideal. But so that's what he's worried about. We got micronutrients that are probably deficient, that's going to hamper the plant from bringing in, nitrogen. The ratios of nitrogen to potash, we've kind of known for a while that can really have an effect. If we have too low of potash levels, that's not good for our nitrogen uptake. And so, that I'm guessing that's what he's talking about, and that could be a real thing. But you're really talking about digging in deep to, to what might be your issue there, which is a good thing to do.
No, absolutely right. And kind of the whole premise and all that is you can't do what I was doing and just drive by it, see some yellowing. There's more variables involved. One of the things that Mike is passionate about on his neck of the woods is tissue sampling. And so when I was asking him, what are you seeing out there? And when he's been scouting fields, and he, like you, he goes, there's micros that seem to be low in some of the samples that he had been seeing, and boron was one that he called out, and he called that one out because he's like, it's to him, it's critical for kernel development or bloom abortion. And so there's a lot there, right? And this is why I respect this profession so much, is because, boy, what a gamble to throw some seed out and have it produce a good crop. There's a lot more to it, and
Yeah,
sometimes folks don't realize this.
and I know I remember doing this on a presentation not too long ago, but it was on, topics similar to this, maybe some of the biologicals that, we're just learning so much and we have so much left to learn. But I think my title of my presentation is "This is what we think we know now," because, these things change our thinking that we've had for decades sometimes, and we just need to make sure that we always realize that this is where we're at today. This may be right, it may be wrong, we may have other pieces of the puzzle come to the table, but we don't stop looking. If science is ever settled, then it's not science. That's what we always need to keep in mind. And I've done a lot of tissue sampling in the last few years in relation to the different testing that we've done with biologicals, with seed treatments and so forth. And and of course you have soil samples and try to make that correlation. And I know our soils around here are always deficient in boron. That is a big question mark there. A lot of times deficient in zinc. Sometimes I'll have very high soil sample ratings on potash, and then my tissue samples show that I am low on potash. So that the potash that's in the soil, the potassium, is not getting into the plant in some cases. And then step back again, I use a fair amount of liquid hog manure, knifed in mostly in the fall, but sometimes in the spring. And it's fabulous. It's a fabulous yield program. I get consistently a 20 bushel yield bump with that program. And last year it was a 40 bushel yield bump. Things were just exaggerated last year with our growing conditions. And so what I'm thinking in my mind is it just extra nitrogen? I'm getting a little extra in that hog manure. Is it all the micronutrients? And what is it exactly that maybe we can pull some of that out that we've learned with hog manure and maybe do it in our normal practices? Do we need to be putting on more boron, or all the micronutrients? So I am working with some more of that in a field type situation this year, and kind of starting to head in that direction.
Well, I think I know what might be a good next podcast unless Mother Nature chooses for us, but it's going on to the boron path, and I find that pretty interesting. I know what I'm doing after this call.
Yeah,
Well,
and be careful not to get locked into, it's got to be boron. That's our problem, because it may or may not be.
variable soils, right? You've with so many different things, and I love you call that out, because we've got the tendency to. I mean, let's be real, right? Marketing does an excellent job of, it's designed to pull you in and keep your attention and have that be the new shiny thing, because more than likely someone will offer us a solution to in the form of a product to purchase to buy that. So the I want to be respectful of your time because I know you have to wrap up soon, and because I'm rambling, but just a couple things I wanted to make sure we hit on, which really was just that tar spot reality check. But we've hit nitrogen pretty good, we've hit rust pretty good, and you really already kind of did the tar spot reality check, which was, hey, look, new kid on the block. Everybody's always excited to talk about what it who saw it first. Not gonna lie, when I was out there taking pretty pictures of the plots and the strip trials, I was looking for it, so I can say that. And I've got more bug poop on my thumb than I cared to have, rubbing it to make sure it's really coming off or not.
Another good reason not to look for it early.
Exactly right. You don't know what's in that bug poop, but every year people are getting excited about early finds. Why does early detection not necessarily mean disaster?
Well, in the instance of tar spot is because I expect the month of July and early August to put it in check. So now it's still, you got to put a pin on that. So you got tar spot there. So it's going to ramp up if we get the right conditions in August, which we always do. That's the thing with tar spot. I believe tar spot, now that it's here, and it's impressive how it's moved westward into, what we consider a westerly type wind. In the face of that, it's moved west real rapidly. But of course, we get these hurricane-looking storms coming up through the Gulf that twist around and bring everything, from the east to the west. So not totally surprising, but point being, it's spread very quickly. We've got it pretty much across the entire Corn Belt now. And I think it's our most consistent disease. I think we're going to see it, pretty much every year because it's there. So we have the pathogen. The host is corn, which we grow a ton of corn. And we're always, then the third part of that disease triangle is having the environment. We're always going to have the environment conducive to tar because August is always going to eventually be cool and wet. August is a hot month, but starting mid-August time frame, we start cooling down at nights. The days are getting shorter and we have really heavy dews, so those are the kind of conditions that are always going to make it active. So it does seem to be our most consistent disease that we see year in and year out now.
So it's overwintering for sure.
We don't know how long it would last in the soil, like if you rotate it away from corn or whatever, but I don't think it matters. It moves so quickly. It's going to come from your neighbor's field. It very easily spreads. So it's just here. It's just a fact of life. We'll have it highly likely forever now.
And I'm sure I'm sure the next genetic or trait package is going to likely have some tar spot resistance to it.
We have the breeding because it's so consistent, because we see it so consistent. It's easy to look at new genetics when they come out, and see what their tolerance is to tar. And we've improved that tolerance pretty rapidly, because of that. So Southern Rust is one. A lot of times we don't have a rating on a Southern Rust hybrid when it first comes out. So why would that be? Well, it's because it's very sporadic. We might, that in the couple of years when that hybrid was in its last couple of years of development before we started producing it, we didn't see any Southern Rust, so therefore we have no rating on it. So but with tar, it's been pretty easy to select for tolerance to it.
Oh, interesting.
And that's not resistance, that's tolerance.
That's tolerance.
Getting it less.
I guess we'll be clear about that. A conspiracy theorist would say that it was spread out intentionally by agronomist boots to then.
Well, I think it was brought into the U.S. by
university or somebody,
but to a university just to do testing. I don't think they did it on purpose. It was brought in.
Yeah,
and I can actually with a good degree of confidence, I can tell you where it was brought in.
and
not by who. Yeah.
So the fact of the matter is, tar spot is going to be put in check here in the summertime, and like you said, it's the August conversation along with what else kind of developed or was kept in check or not. And so it sounds like really, if you're seeing it now because you might, that just means you need to make sure you take a note of that as you scout, and especially pay close attention to in August, right? Which should be monitored today versus a month from now.
Yeah, well, I've been spraying for several years now. I've been putting on a fungicide as just part of my management program. So if you're scouting to, because we're gonna hit R1 here. We're gonna be tasseling shortly after the 4th. This crop's really coming along. Where we were at in northern Illinois yesterday, we had 4 leaves left around before tassel shoots, and that's probably 6 days. We're probably 2 days between leaf stages because of the temperatures and everything. There's likely not to be disease presence. If we're spraying now, it's a preventative method, and it's because we think we can get a yield bump, which I believe we do, relieving the stress, kernel depth, things like that. Whether you believe that or not, that's my opinion. But I'm also wanting to protect that plant because I know I'm going to have tar spot, down the road, or it's highly likely I am. But if you're not doing that, then, at that end of July, 1st of August, you need to get back out there and scout again, because if all of a sudden you've had a bunch of southern rust move in, then it's time to get out there and get it sprayed. You'll still protect yield, that early in the growing season.
Okay. I just want to hit you with a quick rapid takeaways here. What's one thing that growers should scout for this week as they're getting ready for a beautiful 4th of July, celebrating our nation's 250th anniversary, which, cool factoid on that, this nation was 160 years old when Cornelius Seed was founded. So anyways, what should they scout for this week?
Well, I've got a few things here that I want to mention. So obviously corn disease, that's what we've been talking about. The gray leaf spot is really the only one that has a threshold, and not everybody agrees on that. But basically, threshold on that is 3 leaves below the ear leaf. Pull those off, and if 50% of them or more have gray leaf pustule on them, just one, then that's your trigger. That's your threshold to spray. Um, and I say rip them off because train people that it could be pretty small. Those pustules this time of the year might not even have that rectangular look to it that we look, but you hold it up to the sky, and one of the telltale signs of gray leaf spot is a yellow halo surrounding the spot itself. Um, and again, then of course we're looking for any other disease that's out there present at the same time. And the diseases, generally, if they're overwintering diseases, they'll be on the lower leaves first. They're going to splash up, from storms, the spores are, and then move on up the plant. But the rusts, of course, since they get blown in with winds, they could be in the center of the canopy. They could just, wherever the spores that end up landing on the leaf. But a couple other things. So the plot tour we were at yesterday up at Brian Witt's, somebody pulled a leaf, brought it out, and there was some feeding on the leaf, and it was skeletonized. You could still see the veins there were still attached, and then some of it they just eaten the upper surface off, and that waxy cuticle on the bottom of the leaf was still there. And just wondering what that was. That highly likely is your rootworm beetles. We did have a pretty early hatch, started seeing fireflies, which is usually our indication of rootworm beetles. I think the first week in May down here, in central Illinois, but definitely earlier than normal. So they're already out. They'll continue to hatch just depending on how deep the eggs were laid last fall, for quite a period of time. But if you're putting on a fungicide application, you're in a rootworm area, that might be the time when you would put an insecticide in there to get those rootworm beetles so they don't clip their silk. They're only feeding on the leaf right now because they're waiting for the pollen and the silks to get out. I mean, pollen is their number one food source, and of course they'll eat the young silks with the pollen on it there as well. But they are scarifying those leaves a little bit right at this point in time. One more thing I wanted to touch on that would be worth a scouting mention is the new disease that we're looking at in soybeans, which is red crown rot. That is one that is moving. It's been a southern Illinois disease, but we've got instances I know up in Wisconsin now, I think out in southwest Minnesota, Iowa. So it's moving. It is a very, very yield robbing disease, and is going to look like in August. If we get heavy rain events, that's always what triggers our SDS. SDS is a root disease, but it will trigger toxins from the root and SDS to go up to the leaves. And then we have that interveinal chlorosis. So we've got yellowing in between the veins, and the veins are still going to be green. It's a very indicative, easy to identify thing. But brown stem rot also has that same trait. And now this red crown rot is also going to have that same trait. So when we see that now, since red crown rot has moved in, we need to get out there and identify what the disease is. We'll split the stem open. If the pith is brown, it's brown stem rot. If not, it's going to be SDS or possibly now red crown rot. And so above the crown there, that first couple inches above the soil, that's going to be kind of a deep red color if it's red crown rot. And, contact one of us and we'll get that identified, even if we need to send it into a lab, because that's a whole new management system if we start having that disease. Now, the Victrato soybean seed treatment that just came out, and we used it this year. We had a limited supply that we got late in the spring. We did get quite a little bit of it out. I treated everything with it on my own acres. It is a nematicide. Okay, that's the reason they developed the Victrato. It's also very good on sudden death. So it's going to replace our Saltro in our seed treatment mix. It's going to get soybean cyst nematode, which is a huge game changer. We can't forget that's probably the number one yield robbing factor that we have in soybean production. It's also going to give us early season frog eye leaf spot, septoria brown spot. I think there's another disease or two that they've identified activity on now, but it's also red crown rot. It's got really good activity on red crown rot. And so here's a product that we're sticking out there to control sudden death, which is huge yield limiting disease for us. Soybean cyst nematode, which will be everywhere in our footprint. And now we have that protection against the red crown rot. So that's a huge value. I'm really highly recommending that everybody uses that in their seed treatment next year. The value is certainly should be there, and way more than that when you talk about soybean cyst nematode in particular.
How cool is it that you can say, I really love this XtendFlex line, which is from the Bayer camp, and then you're like, I really have this issue that needs to be handled, and it seems like Victrato treatment from the Syngenta camp is by far top class of it, that we can put those together and offer that as a package to a customer. Sorry, I just as you said that, I'm like, man, that is awesome. That's
No, it's truly the value of buying from an independent. We are not going to sell our own products just because they're our own products, because we don't have them. We are literally just a seed treatment company. We have some products that are protecting, the seed that we do carry from Meristem and Pivot Bio, but that's just enhancement to the seed. But we don't have insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, all that. So we can give a third party recommendation on that, just based on what's best for our customers. But mainly we can use the products that we believe 100% are best for our customers. That's why we have Viantis on our corn to protect against Pythium. And I saw a amazing example of how good that did versus a corporate seed that did not have it on there. And they don't have it on there because a different corporation makes it, and they're not going to support each other.
right.
So that value cannot be stressed enough. It's something that we bring to the table that you don't get from your corporate companies. It's just the way it is.
Absolutely. And my intent on that isn't I'm saying, hey, just get it from Cornelius, it's support an independent seed company by far, and what better year to do it than the independent nation for 250. Sorry, I'm just so excited about the 250th, as you can tell. And so Scott, sorry, take it back to the rapid-ish fire question. There was we should be scouting for really a whole host of diseases, but something that you touched on new there for me was soybeans and red crown rot. On the red crown rot, you've always taught the guys to have a shovel with you because you need to dig to really truly identify it. Is there any foliar observation that kind of signals to somebody, I might have an issue, I need to get a shovel to take a look at this?
Yeah, I think what I say is don't go into the field unarmed.
That's right.
So Always have a time appropriate shovel. So it might be a trowel early in the season and a spade later in the season and a knife, because we always need to, split stems and see what's going on inside there. So first time you don't take it in the field, you'll need it for sure. But the foliar indication is the interveinal chlorosis on the top of the leaves that we see with sudden death.
Okay.
And you could just see stressed soybean pockets of yellowing or, stunted soybeans during the year, because all these diseases move in right at germination and in early growth, seedling stages. They're infecting the plant all year. You can have sudden death in there and never see the leaf portion of the disease if you don't get that big rain event in August that causes the toxins to move up to the leaves. So, but it would be affecting your yield just the same all year.
Okay, so it easily confuses sudden death, and is what I'm hearing on that. Okay, next question. What's one thing that growers are overreacting to right now?
Overreacting to, that's a good, well, I mean, I don't have the whole tar spot right now deal. I don't know if I called it an overreaction, but it's not the time to worry about tar spots. We worry about that in August. Well, I guess we do worry about it now, because if we put on that long residual fungicide at R1, then that's gonna take care of that. But otherwise, I don't think any overreactions. And I'm encouraged with the positive. A lot of times when I go out, I'm like the angel of death. I go look at things that are bad, the customers. And many stops that we've had so far, we've asked the questions, anything of a concern that you want to go look at? And the answer's been no, everything's really pretty good right now. So it's kind of nice for a change.
It is now. What a beautiful segue to my last rapid fire-ish question, which was, what's something that folks could be underestimating right now? Oh, that one was so good it left you speechless.
Yeah, well, it's kind of related to the fact that things do look pretty good right now. So I don't see a lot of issues, a lot of headwinds, other than the southern rust. I mean, but that's been the theme of our entire call here.
Yeah.
Is southern rust is definitely already here, and the conditions are really, really ripe for it. And we know after last year how injurious that disease can be. So do not underestimate what we're trying to stress here.
Ah, excellent. Well, Greg, thank you for being available for this call and reminding me that we had it and sharing your insights. And as always, remember that every field is different, folks, and best decisions come from getting out and scouting what's actually happening in your own acres. Keep an eye on those saturated areas and stay alert for changes in disease pressure, and don't let headlines replace what's really happening in your field. I think that's the kind of a big theme that you've caught on throughout this whole call. Thank you for listening to the Cornelius Seed Podcast, and if you've found this episode helpful, please share it with your neighbor. So until the next time.